ESPN fired me today, I wouldn't lose no sleep. You know why? Because somebody in Boston would hire me.
Kendrick Perkins, the big man with the even bigger mouth, might finally be staring down the barrel of consequences for running that mouth a little too loose. And no, we aren't talking about another one of his wild basketball hot takes. This time, the heat is different. This time, it's personal. It's because he decided to go toe-to-toe with the heavyweight champion of sports shouting matches, Stephen A. Smith. In this video, we are going to rip the lid off the simmering feud between Big Perk, Stephen A., and the corporate giant that signs both their checks, ESPN. Buckle up. Let's call it the Perkins-Smith collision course. Kendrick Perkins walked through the doors of ESPN in 2019, carrying a whole lot of attitude. He had hung up his jersey in 2018 after 14 hard-hitting seasons in the paint, rocking a championship ring he earned with the Boston Celtics back in 2008. Then you have Stephen A. Smith has been the face of the network since 2003. A guy who cut his teeth in the gritty world of newspaper journalism at the Philadelphia Inquirer before he ever touched a microphone. Producers threw them together on first take, like tossing a match into a tank of gasoline. The real fireworks started during the 2020 NBA bubble season. Perkins came at it from the locker room. His arguments were built on sweat, bruises, and the code of the court. He spoke the language of the players. Smith? He came from the press box. Stephen A. dealt in headlines, superstar narratives, and that signature theatrical screaming that rattles your speakers. It was a clash of cultures, not just opinions. Perkins was blunt force trauma. Smith was high volume drama. The fans saw the chemistry and the conflict instantly. By May 2021, the gloves came off over the Brooklyn Nets. Perkins called Smith's hype train for the Nets super team a total joke. Smith snapped back, questioning if Perk even understood how teams were built. That was the first jab. Fast forward to March 15th, 2022. They're live on air debating the MVP war between Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. Perkins is making his case for Embiid, getting passionate when Smith just slices right through him, cutting him off mid-sentence like he wasn't even there. Perk didn't let it slide. He took to Twitter, posting, "Let me finish my thought next time. Cold." Stephen A., he just retweeted it with a laughing emoji. Disrespect level 100. June 1st, 2023, the NBA Finals preview. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Perkins claimed the Denver Nuggets had zero killer instinct against the Heat. Smith's volume knob broke off. He starts screaming. Perkins leans in and says, "Stephen A., you're only yelling because you know deep down I'm right." Smith fires back, "No, Perk! I'm yelling because you are wrong again." It was iconic. ESPN loved it so much they slapped that clip into every promo reel they had. But here's the twist. After the show, Perkins went on the Stephen A. Smith show. They laughed it off like old drinking buddies. Smith told the audience, "We push each other to be better." But was it all love? February 2024, Perkins questioned whether LeBron James was pulling the strings on coaching hires. Smith, the ultimate LeBron defender, wasn't having it. Perkins looked him in the eye and said, "Stephen A., you're too close to LeBron. You can't see straight." Smith exploded. "I've been covering this league longer than you've been retired. Don't you ever question my objectivity." It got so heated, Molly Kieram had to jump in like a referee breaking up a fight. Social media, it was a war zone. Half the fans were with Perk for keeping it 100, the other half bowed down to Smith's resume. But the weirdest part? No apologies. Zero. They showed up for the next show like nothing happened. The whole cycle from screaming match to handshake took less than 24 hours. It's emotional whiplash. July 2024, the Olympic roster debate. Perkins wanted young blood like Jason Tatum on the floor. Smith wanted the old guard to lead. Perkins did the unthinkable. He interrupted the king of interruptions. A total power move. He barked, "Let me talk. Stephen A. actually stopped. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for dramatic effect, before he slowly waved his hand. "All right, Perk, enlighten us." The sarcasm was dripping, but he yielded the floor. That clip racked up over 500,000 views on YouTube overnight. Then came January 20th, 2025, the MVP ladder debate. Perkins put Shai Gilgeous-Alexander over Jokic. Smith shook his head. "Perk, your takes are getting wilder by the day." Perkins didn't blink. "At least I played the game. You're just talking about it." The studio went dead silent. Smith broke the ice. Deadly serious. Respect the resume, Perk. Heavy hitters like Shaquille O'Neal jumped on social media to back Perkins, validating the player versus observer argument. It resonated with everyone who ever laced up a pair of sneakers. You can't teach the feeling of the game, no matter how many articles you write. Smith addressed the elephant in the room on his pod, saying, "Perk and I go at it, but it's all love." Then, March 10th, 2025. They stopped arguing about players and started arguing about the mirror. Perkins told him, straight up, "Stephen A., you are part of the problem with sports media." Smith smirked. "I'm the solution. The ratings prove it." The Blog Times Awful Announcing Times called it refreshing honesty, and then they high-fived. Unbelievable. This meta debate worked because it said the quiet part out loud. These two are colleagues, competitors, and entertainment partners trapped in a format that demands conflict to survive. But then, February 2026 hit. February 8th, Perkins drops the bomb on Time's NBA Countdown. "If ESPN fired me today, I wouldn't lose no sleep." 2 days later, February 10th, back on Time's First Take asterisk, they're talking about a scuffle between the Pistons and Hornets. Perkins tells Smith, "You need to fix your attitude." Smith just laughs. "Perk, look at you. You're the one who's heated." ESPN put it in the recap. On the surface, business as usual. But listen closer. Earlier that week, Perkins had casually tossed out that somebody in Boston would hire me line, which is hilarious, considering half of Boston celebrated when he was allegedly banned from team events, but that's the pattern. Perk says something wild, Smith punches back, the volume hits 11, the internet breaks, and the next morning, they're back in those chairs, doing the same dance. The analysts at Times, the Ringer Times, have basically called this WWE for sports fans choreographed chaos designed to keep your eyes glued to the screen. Asterisk Bleacher Report Times asks if this circus kills actual basketball analysis, driving away the purists. But the scoreboard doesn't lie. Stephen A. Smith is still the highest paid talent in the building, and Kendrick Perkins inked a fat contract extension in 2024. Drama sells, baby. The friction? That's not a bug, folks. That is the product. Perkins didn't stutter in his 2025 GQ interview when he laid it out plain. Stephen A. challenges me, and I go right back at him. It's a heavyweight fight, but here's the twist. That's exactly why it works when the red light goes off. They've teamed up for charity, poured time into a 2024 NBA Cares initiative, proving that the on-air blood sport is built on a foundation of genuine, ironclad respect. But let's not get it twisted. The storm clouds chasing Kendrick Perkins aren't coming from Stephen A. Smith's direction. The mob calling for his job? That fire was lit a long time ago. This isn't a sudden cancellation. It's a slow-motion train wreck. We're talking years of hot takes that turned cold, business moves that raise eyebrows, and on-air moments so awkward they make his own co-hosts want to crawl under the desk. But if you want to pinpoint ground zero, you have to go back to March 2023. That was the eruption that shook the building. Perkins sat on the First Take set, looked into the camera, and dropped a bomb. 80% of NBA MVP voters are white. He claimed this racial bias was the only reason guys like Nikola Jokic, Steve Nash, and Dirk Nowitzki have trophies on their shelves. The backlash hit like a shockwave. JJ Redick was sitting right there, and you could see the vein popping in his forehead. He didn't just disagree. He accused Perkins of implying the entire voting bloc was racist. It was tense, it was ugly, and it was live. Then The Godfather chimed in. Charles Barkley, from his untouchable throne at TNT, didn't mince words. He called the take asinine. He called it silly. He called it stupid. He basically buried him on national television. It got so bad that ESPN had to do the unthinkable. They issued a correction the next morning. Molly Kareem had to read a statement like a hostage, clarifying that the voter panel is public and actually quite diverse. That wasn't just a mistake. It was a public humiliation, not just for Big Perk, but for the network that let that commentary fly without a safety net. You think the studio was quiet? You should have seen social media. That clip started a forest fire on Reddit's r/NBA that is still smoldering today. The threads didn't just explode. They went nuclear. Users weren't just calling it a bad take, they branded it irresponsible journalism and started demanding his termination right then and there. Fast forward to October 2024, just when the smoke was clearing, ESPN breaks a story on Nilly, a company Perkins co-founded with Wall Street shark Chris Riccardi. Here's the pitch. Nilly hands college athletes a bag of cash up front anywhere from $25,000 to six figures. The catch? They take 10 to 50% of that kid's name, image, and likeness money for up to 7 years. Consumer finance experts like Michael Haddix Jr. and Chris Peterson took one look at the fine print and tore it to shreds. They didn't call it business, they called it predatory. They compared it to high-interest loan sharking, targeting kids who don't know any better. And the legal gymnastics were impressive. They structured these contracts as licensing deals instead of loans. Why? To dodge repayment laws if the kid flops? Sure. But it also conveniently sidestepped all those pesky truth in lending protections designed to stop people from getting fleeced. It gets worse. They wrote in one-sided trapdoors that let Nilly terminate the deal if an athlete's reputation took a hit, yet the company had zero obligation to actually help these kids secure the deals they were skimming off the top of. The reaction on X was absolutely merciless. The consensus? You can't have Kendrick Perkins sitting there judging amateur sports while he's running a predatory scheme on the athletes. It nullified his credibility instantly. Reddit threads turned into a chorus of unethical. Fans were demanding ESPN cut ties immediately to avoid getting dragged into the mud with Perkins' side hustle. And the cringe? Oh, the cringe just kept piling up. October 2025, Perkins is on SportsCenter with Elle Duncan. She makes a harmless, lighthearted pun on his last name, one of the perks. Simple, right? Perkins decides to improvise. He hits back with, "What do you need ibuprofen for when you can have a perk?" A Percocet joke on live Disney-owned television. Elle Duncan looked like she'd seen a ghost. She paused eternally long before stammering, "I literally can't stand you and I love you." She tried to save it, but the air had already left the room. On X, nobody was laughing. It morphed into something much darker. Comments ranged from, "Bro is begging to get fired," to, "That looked uncomfortable as hell, suspend him." That was the chant. Reddit's R, NBA threads labeled it, televised sexual harassment, and the calls for his removal hit a fever pitch that was impossible to ignore. Duncan had to jump on X herself to clarify that Perk is her guy, and it was just banter. But in the court of public opinion, the verdict was already guilty. Then came the comparison that broke the internet in early 2026. Perkins is on NBA Today, and with a straight face, he compares himself to Victor Wembanyama, the 7'4" French alien who is literally redefining the geometry of basketball. The context didn't matter, the stats didn't matter. The comparison was so absurd on its face that the internet didn't even argue, they just pointed and laughed. The reaction was described as nuclear heat. X didn't just explode, it melted down with demands to get this man off the air before he said something even crazier. It was just another data point, a pattern. Fans have been tracking this stuff for years with the focus of a federal prosecutor. Remember his prediction that the Minnesota Timberwolves were tanking to get their coach fired? He said that days before they went on a winning streak. It was added to the running ledger of incompetence that fans keep updated daily. Or when he came for Kawhi Leonard, suggesting the man should retire. Draymond Green and Baron Davis saw that and absolutely torched him. They called it sick. They reminded the world that this advice was coming from a guy who averaged 2.5 points a game when he washed out of the league. Then he goes on road tripping and cries about losing his friendships with LeBron James and Kevin Durant over his critical takes. Like blasting Bronny James getting drafted. But the fans? They didn't feel sorry for him. They dismissed it as self-victimization from a guy who burned his own bridges. Through the fire, Perkins has maintained a posture of defiance that borders on performance art. February 2026 on NBA Countdown. He puffs his chest out and declares, "If ESPN fired me today, I would lose no sleep. Somebody in Boston would hire me." He thought he was projecting power. Instead, he handed the internet a loaded gun. Fans on Reddit and X took that as an invitation, memes, wish lists, and countdown clocks popped up within hours. "Please, Boston," they begged. "Take him." This controversy isn't new. It stretches back further than most casuals even remember. Rewind to the 2021 NBA Finals. Perkins looks at Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak, and calls him Robin. Then he calls Chris Middleton the real Batman. He looked the world in the eye and implied the reigning Finals MVP was a sidekick in his own championship movie. That take didn't just annoy Bucks fans, it infuriated them on a visceral cellular level. But the consequences of all this, they were about to become far more severe than just some angry tweet. It stopped being just about basketball takes and crossed into terrifying territory when Perkins dropped a bombshell on Road Trip and confessing that a fan had actually threatened to murder his wife and children over a single, a nightmare scenario that forced ESPN's security unit to hunt the guy down and put him behind bars. But the drama wasn't just coming from the streets. Inside the corporate offices, ESPN slapped a restraining order on Perkins, along with Dan Orlovsky and Mina Kimes, forcing them to sever all ties with Papaya Gaming, a shady solitaire app which just threw more gasoline on the fire that Perkins' side hustles were dragging the network's reputation into the mud. Then came April 2025, where the wheels really started falling off and he was caught red-handed in a lie about boycotting the NBA awards. When audio leaked proving he was making it all up, the internet roasted him alive, leading to a fresh tsunami of fans demanding his termination. And if you think he's got a safety net back home, think again. His relationship with the Boston Celtics has turned into a Greek tragedy of burned bridges. After he torched Coach Joe Mazzulla with that now infamous insult, if you take his brain out and put it in a bird, the bird is going to start flying backwards. The franchise reportedly slammed the door in his face, banning him from the 2024 championship parade and the 2025 ring night ceremony. The tide hasn't just turned, the ocean is drowning him. The vitriol aimed at Kendrick Perkins isn't just coming from faceless trolls in the dark corners of Reddit anymore. We're talking about legitimate heat from Hall of Famers, active superstars, and guys with rings on their fingers. These are legends whose resumes make Perkins look like a junior varsity player, and when they speak, it hits with the force of a sledgehammer. What we are witnessing is the slow-motion demolition of Perkins' credibility, a public dismantling happening live on air with absolutely zero apologies offered. And leading the charge, none other than Sir Charles Barkley, who has been absolutely relentless. Back in March 2025, after Perkins went on NBA Today claiming the Lakers were the saviors of the league, Barkley lost his mind on Inside the NBA, screaming, "I saw a fool idiot on TV saying the Lakers saved the NBA. He's an idiot and a fool, but he knows who he is." While Shaq was nearly passing out from laughter next to him, Barkley tore into ESPN's obsession with big markets, shouting out Cleveland and OKC as the real stories, basically, telling Perkins to watch the actual games. Perkins, never one to let a beef die, fired back on X with his trademark tough guy act. Hey, NBA on TNT might want to tell that senior citizen Charles Barkley that I'll be around when he sees an idiot or fool in person. Make sure he keeps that same energy. It was raw, it was personal, and you could feel the years of pent-up aggression boiling over between the two networks. Remember, Barkley is the guy who coined the term ESPN disease. That desperate need to say something stupid just because the red light is on, and he has repeatedly diagnosed Perkins as patient zero. But in a twist nobody saw coming, the peace treaty was signed in the shadows. By June 2025, with Barkley eyeing a move to ESPN, Perkins went on Stephen A. Smith's show and spilled the beans on how his wife actually pushed for a ceasefire through Michael Wilbon. That led to a group chat where Barkley surprisingly texted, "Big Perk, you're doing an outstanding job. We shouldn't be throwing shots at each other in the NBA Finals. Man, let's link up and break bread." And how did Perkins describe the end of one of sports media's loudest wars? It wasn't nothing but some pork chops when we squashed it. But while that beef ended with a meal, his clash with JJ Redick was a straight-up intellectual execution. On First Take in March 2023, Redick dissected Perkins' racial bias narrative with the cold precision of a prosecuting attorney. The implication and what you are implying, that the white voters that vote on NBA are racist, that they favor white people. We all know what you implied the other day. Redick didn't just disagree. He called it the single most cringe take Perkins had ever spewed. He systematically destroyed the argument, pulling apart the cherry-picked data and exposing the massive logical holes for the world to see. It's really weird that a bunch of racist voters would mainly vote for black players except for a few handful of times. See how stupid that sounds? It was painful to watch one of the few times Perkins looked genuinely frozen, completely outgunned in a battle of wits. Then you have Draymond Green, whose war with Perkins went from professional to personal in the blink of an eye. During the 2022 finals, Green dropped a racial slur on his podcast aimed at Perk, later trying to clean it up by saying, "I could have very well replaced the word with clown. I stand on what I mean and what I say." Perkins didn't blink, firing back with a seething 2-minute video. "Hey Draymond, you good? What the bleep is wrong with you? Didn't you just win your 4th championship? What the bleep you worried about me for?" Just when we thought it was over, the feud exploded again in October 2024 when Perkins claimed Kawhi Leonard should retire. Green saw an opening and took the shot with surgical cruelty. I was baffled. The man averaged 2.5 points per game for 3 years straight. It was the ultimate scoreboard moment. Guys like LeBron and KD were begging Kawhi to join them, while Perkins was just holding a clipboard. Baron Davis jumped off the top rope to finish him off. That's sick coming from Kendrick Perkins. You averaged 2, bro. It's a hierarchy. If you ain't one of them, shut the hell up. If you want to understand why these guys are coming for his neck, just look at his recent scorching hot take on Steve Kerr and the Warriors. Talking about the Jonathan Kuminga drama on Road Trippin', Perkins didn't just suggest a tweak, he went for the jugular. Steve Kerr is the problem. Period. 4 words. Full stop. That is the Kendrick Perkins experience in a nutshell. Loud, declarative, completely lacking nuance, and doubled down on with the confidence of a man who refuses to check the stats. It is this exact crash test dummy style of commentary that makes him absolutely magnetic to the drama-hungry fans and totally insufferable to the actual hoopers he talks about. While every other front office is playing 4D chess, stacking chips for the immediate grind in the long haul, one team is being left in the dust. He didn't just critique the strategy, he drew a hard line in the sand between franchises investing in young killers and the Golden State Warriors, who he argued had taken every golden ticket to develop talent and lit it on fire. When it comes to the Warriors, you have to ask the uncomfortable question. The future? What future? There is no future. That kind of ruthless bluntness, the audacity to look at a dynasty with 4 rings and tell them they're dead walking, is exactly why Kevin Durant once declared open war on him. It's the reason LeBron James hit that unfollow button and why Ja Morant brushed him off like a gnat. But this is the Stephen A. experience. Welcome to Stephen A. Smith and the fine art of the manufactured crisis. If you think Kendrick Perkins is a lightning rod for bad takes, you're missing the scale. Smith is the entire atmospheric pressure system that generates the storm, the thunder, and the lightning strike in the first place. His run at ESPN, spanning more than 2 decades with a few dramatic exits and entrances, has been defined by an endless, almost supernatural ability to keep the pot stirring. And let's be clear, this isn't carelessness. It's a calculated, confrontational masterpiece that made him the highest paid talking head in the game while simultaneously making him the villain in half of American living rooms. But to understand the monster, you have to look at the shadow. The incident that foreshadowed the chaos dropped in 2014, right in the middle of the Ray Rice domestic violence firestorm. Smith sat on the First Take desk, looked into the camera, and suggested women needed to check their own playbook when it came to preventing violence. Let's make sure we don't do anything to provoke wrong actions. The sentence hung in the air like toxic smoke, widely interpreted as classic victim blaming. The backlash was instant. His own ESPN colleague, Michelle Beadle, didn't hold back, publicly condemning him. The network had no choice. They benched Smith for 1 week. He apologized, sure, but that week on the sidelines didn't humble him. It established the blueprint for his entire career survival strategy. The cycle is unbreakable. Smith drops a nuclear take, the internet tries to cancel him, he offers a remix of an apology, and somehow he comes back with his job secure and his ratings even higher. And let's be real, the Ray Rice disaster wasn't his rookie mistake. Rewind to 2010. He stood in Floyd Mayweather's corner against domestic abuse allegations, dropping the line, "Men ain't wrong always." People were furious, but he skated by with 0 suspension. Then came 2015, where he cracked a joke about women soccer players not wanting to mess up their hair. It was labeled sexist, Twitter exploded, and he had to issue the standard digital apology. But the beefs with the athletes, that's where the real cinematic drama lives. It is combustible, personal, and petty. His Cold War with LeBron James hit a boiling point in March 2025, turning a Lakers-Knicks game at Madison Square Garden into a reality TV episode. LeBron actually stopped, walked over to Smith courtside, and confronted him face-to-face, demanding he stop talking about my son. The context? On First Take, Smith had stripped away all the niceties, pleading with the king. We all know Bronny James is only in the NBA because of his dad. He didn't just say it, he begged. I am pleading with LeBron James as a father. Stop this. Just stop this. But here's where the cynic in Smith comes out. After the courtside altercation, he questioned the timing, pointing out it happened right when his contract renewal was hitting the news cycle. Was it real, or was it a publicity stunt? He went on Gilbert Arenas' podcast and called LeBron's confrontation weak. Then he hopped on Ryan Clark's show and accused LeBron of having a racial bias when picking which media members to bark at. But if you want true hostility, look at the Kevin Durant saga. That bad blood started way back in 2015 over a report about Durant's free agency. Durant flat out called Smith a liar. And that's when the mask slipped and we saw the Don Corleone of sports media. Smith looked directly into the lens and delivered a threat that still echoes in the halls of ESPN. You don't want to make an enemy out of me. The words didn't just hang in the air. They felt like a declaration of war against any athlete who dared to question his sources. The way he stared, unblinking, cold, deadly serious, made it crystal clear this wasn't just for KD. This was a warning shot to the entire league. When Durant finally bounced to the Warriors in 2016, Smith labeled it the weakest superstar move in NBA history, a grudge he nursed like a favorite pet for years. They had a brief ceasefire during a 2019 interview, but the détente collapsed in 2022 when Durant went on the offensive again. KD argued that guys like Smith, Skip Bayless, and Shannon Sharpe had ruined the game, warping the way fans value players. Smith fired back instantly, claiming analysts are a permanent fixture of the landscape, basically saying, "We aren't going anywhere, pal." It wasn't a defense. It was a territorial claim. This is our game now. But honestly, the fights with athletes are child's play compared to the knife fights with his own colleagues. In early 2024, Smith went scorched earth. He unleashed a 45-minute podcast tirade against Jason Whitlock that made Kendrick Lamar's diss tracks look polite. Why? Because Whitlock questioned his paycheck, accused him of stabbing coworkers in the back, and claimed he played the race card for clout. Before he pressed record on that rant, Smith actually notified ESPN executives and his pastor. That detail doesn't make it better. It makes it terrifyingly premeditated. He even leaked a contract clause that legally banned the two of them from ever appearing on air together, proving the hatred was signed, sealed, and notarized years ago. Then there's the Michelle Beadle saga, a feud that reignited in late 2025 like a dormant volcano. SiriusXM shook up the schedule, replacing her show with his, and the gloves came off immediately. Beadle said she had zero respect for his work and refused to share a studio with him, citing a petty promo from 2019 where Smith appeared right after her get-up farewell. She saw it as him marking his territory. Beadle described the timing as deliberate humiliation. It was the network sending a signal. Her leaving wasn't a loss, it was just clearing the stage for the main character. Smith didn't take the high road. He went on an extended rant, accusing her of bitterness because she can't get a job in this business. His diagnosis? It's all because of that stank attitude. Pure evil. Beadle came out swinging, calling Smith a monster, a guy who cares more about his own hype reel than the actual game, but Smith? He didn't just brush it off, he laughed in her face, labeling her bitterness as the tragic cry of a has-been watching his rocket ship leave her in the dust. But when you drag politics into the arena, the game changes, and suddenly the backlash isn't just noise, it's a tidal wave threatening to stretch. Smith's empire way past the sidelines of sports and deep into a minefield where the old rules of trash talk absolutely do not apply. Fast forward to 2025, the Jeffrey Epstein client list drops, the world stops, and Smith? He waves it off like a bad foul call, telling the audience it doesn't matter to regular folks, a move that instantly lit a fire under fans who accused him of shrugging off one of the darkest crimes imaginable. The reaction was nuclear sports fans weren't just tweeting, they were organizing, calling for a total boycott and labeling his take disgusting in a way that felt personal. And what did he do? He doubled down, claiming most Americans are too busy paying bills to care about billionaire scandals, a defense that felt less like a shield and more like gasoline on an open flame. Then came the stumble, the heat check that missed the rim completely when he tried to link an NBA gambling. Arrest to some grand vendetta by Donald Trump, a conspiracy theory so wild he actually had to walk it back while the critics circled like sharks, marking one of the few times the loudest voice in sports actually had to eat his words. By early 2026, the tension was suffocating. He jumped in to defend Trump's roast of Bad Bunny's Super Bowl show, sparking a cultural wildfire where people started screaming that cancel culture was finally coming for the king of first take. Smith went on the defensive, claiming the mob was banging on ESPN's door, demanding his head, painting himself as the martyr in a coordinated hit job rather than a shock jock who simply misread the room. But the armor was showing cracks. A Barrett Media analysis dropped in February 2026, tearing apart the untouchable myth and warning that Smith's arrogance, that belief that he's too big to fail, might just be the tragic flaw that brings the whole temple crashing down. Yet, through all the noise, the threats, and the chaos, Smith's throne at ESPN hasn't even wobbled. It's made of iron. With a reported contract worth $100 million, he isn't just an employee. He is the gravitational force holding the entire network's schedule together. He is the reason the lights stay on at first take. He's the only reason Perkins has a microphone. And he is the human shield allowing ESPN to weather storm after storm without steering the ship into the rocks. But don't get it twisted. ESPN has a history, a brutal pattern of controversial executions. For the last decade, the network has been running a slaughterhouse, establishing a firing culture so sudden, so ruthless, and so frequently wrapped in scandal that watching a star get walked out of the building by security has become just another Tuesday in Bristol. The math doesn't lie, and it tells a terrifying ghost story about the decline of cable TV. The empire is shrinking, bleeding out from over 100 million households a decade ago to a terrified 67 million today. Flashback to April 2017, the red wedding of sports media, where 100 employees were gutted in a single day, including legends like NBA insider Chad Ford, Mark Stein, and NFL heavyweight Ed Werder. The 2017 purge didn't discriminate. It targeted the faces on your screen and the people in the control room, with 20 bodies dropping in Bristol, Connecticut alone. You had personalities like Britt McHenry and Jason Stark jumping on social media, stunned, typing out their thank you notes while the ink on their termination papers was still wet. But if you thought that was bad, June 2023 was a bloodbath. A massacre where 20 high-profile stars were sacrificed to the gods of Disney's budget cuts. The casualty list was heartbreaking. Susie Colbert, a legend who gave 27 years of her life to the network, stood amidst the wreckage, calling it devastating, yet holding her head high as a pioneer for women in the industry. While Ashley Brewer got the axe literally a week before her wedding day, talk about cold forcing her to spin it as a moment for personal growth while the rest of us watched in horror, realizing that loyalty meant absolutely nothing to the suits upstairs. Just look at the names on the tombstone. Jeff Van Gundy, Max Kellerman, Keyshawn Johnson, Jalen Rose, Steve Young, Matt Hasselbeck, Todd McShay, and David Pollack, an absolute dream team of talent, wiped out in a blink. ESPN claimed it was about efficiency, not talent, which is corporate speak for you cost too much, a distinction that probably didn't help much as these icons packed their cardboard boxes. Critics tore the network apart for targeting the veterans, fueling the theory that ESPN was dumping the experts to pivot toward cheaper, louder, digital-first hype men, a suspicion that basically became fact when they handed Pat McAfee $85 million over 5 years while showing the door to the journalists who actually built the place. And you cannot ignore the political landmines in these hallways. Remember Jamela Hill in 2017? She called Donald Trump a white supremacist on Twitter. The White House got involved, and next thing you know, she's gone a casualty of the culture war. That moment set a terrifying precedent, proving that your personal tweets aren't personal at all. They're corporate liabilities that can end your career in a heartbeat. But honestly, the layoffs are just the tip of the iceberg. The firings driven by scandal reveal a much nastier, darker rot festering inside the network's culture. Cut to August 2023. Senior VP Lee Fitting gets walked out the door after HR finally digs into years of alleged sleaze and misconduct. This wasn't some low-level staffer. Fitting was the architect who turned College game day into a religion and ran Monday Night Football like a Navy operation. But strip away the awards and the ratings, and you find a horror show. More than 20 women stepped forward describing a toxic nightmare under his command, with allegations that were specific, creepy, and stomach-turning. We're talking about a 2012 comment judging a woman's oral skills based on how she drank a beer. Yeah, you heard that right. A 2014 incident where he patted his lap like a creep and offered it as a chair to a female staffer. And text from 2018 telling an employee, "You look hot," proof that behind the glossy studio lights, the shadows were pitch black. The whispers in the hallways were chilling, spoken in hushed tones like a survival guide for new recruits. Whatever you do not go into a room alone with him. Fitting played the denial game, brushing off the allegations through a spokesperson before jumping ship, landing safely in the world of WWE in January 2024. But if you think that was messy, the situation with Sam Ponder introduced a whole new level of chaos, a controversy where the firing itself became the main event. The hammer dropped in August 2025. After 9 years anchoring times, Sunday NFL Countdown times, and 14 years at the network, Ponder was out. She wasn't just a host. She was the first woman to ever sit in that chair back in 2017. She was a legitimate trailblazer, smashing through the glass ceiling of an industry that, for decades, preferred keeping women on the sidelines holding microphones while the men did the real talking. ESPN tried to spin the narrative, framing her exit as a boring efficiency measure, just another budget cut alongside heavy hitters like Robert Griffin III and Todd McShay. But Ponder wasn't buying the corporate script. She drew a straight line from her dismissal to her vocal, controversial stance on transgender athletes competing in women's sports. She lit the match, and the bridge burned. Yet the rot went deeper than just on-air talent. It painted a grim picture of an organization where misconduct wasn't just a bug. It was festering right at the top of the food chain. Take Rob King, a heavy-hitting executive editor-at-large, one of the last survivors of the John Skipper regime. He didn't get a gold watch in a retirement party. He was shown the door after HR got wind of social media harassment allegations that made the suits sweat. King tried to save face, claiming he left voluntarily after nearly 20 years, but the leaks from inside the building told a much darker story about why his keycard stopped working. Through it all, Chairman Jimmy Pitaro remained silent, a void of leadership that only fueled the rumors, bringing back the ghosts of 2017 when John Skipper had to resign after admitting to a cocaine addiction. The body count kept rising. Christina Douglas, an executive director, got the boot in April 2025 following a stack of employee complaints. It was just one more exit in a cascade of firings that turned ESPN's executive suite into a revolving door spinning so fast it looked like it had no emergency brake. These weren't just departures. They were tremors, causing massive instability. One report described the mood among the remaining staff as palpable insecurity, pure fear, especially when they looked at Stephen A. Smith. While everyone else worried about their rent, Smith was reportedly locked in negotiations for a contract worth $100 million. A February 2025 report laid bare the brutal paradox haunting the network. Imagine the morale. Employees terrified for their jobs, watching the network back a dump truck of cash up to a single personality's driveway, creating a caste system where only one man matters and everyone else is expendable. And then you have the Pat McAfee grenade. If the workplace was already fractured, the McAfee situation was a sledgehammer to the cracks. Behind the scenes, veteran producers were tearing their hair out, fed up with what they called McAfee's diva behavior, the kind of ego trip that grinds production to a halt. We're talking about public attacks on producers and executives, broadcast for the world to hear, with absolutely zero check from network leadership. McAfee went on air and literally called former executive Norby Williamson a rat, accusing a high-level boss of sabotaging the show from the inside. And the response? The executives defended him. They called him a creative force, letting the internal resentment boil over and contributing to what times the Ringer Times called ESPN's year from hell. Fast forward to January 2026, the network fires 2 legendary tennis announcers. Because apparently, no one is safe. It sparked a fresh wave of backlash, gutting experienced voices for some vague restructuring that has produced exactly 0 visible improvement in the actual coverage. This is the minefield Kendrick Perkins is dancing through. He's operating in a network that has bled out a third of its audience and is desperate for a win. A network that has pink-slipped hundreds of people since 2017. A place where executives get fired for harassment just as often as talent gets cut for budget reasons. Hosts are being walked out the door for tweeting their personal beliefs, and the internal mood swings wildly between crippling anxiety and bitter resentment. In this Shark Tank, you have Perkins, a man who unironically compared himself to Victor Wembanyama, a guy who co-founded a company accused of predatory lending, who picks fights with Hall of Famers, and publicly said he would lose absolutely no sleep over getting fired. Well, he might want to wake up. In this climate, the idea that Perkins could be the next head on the chopping block isn't a leap of logic. It's a short, inevitable step off the edge.